Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. Today on Collection List, I want to talk about cost of living. I have a lot to go through. This is part of my Collection List series, I think, since 2019 Vice. Now let's get going. So, I talked a little bit about trimming expenses, and you can only trim so much. And with the cost of living now being really high, I wanted to show some charts, some graphs, some budget items, and the money supply in Canada. And I know that I've made videos, the last 2 years almost now, I believe, um, and I wanted to get more into it because I feel like it could benefit some people. Hopefully, people find this and see this and can learn from it if they can learn anything, that type of thing. So I wanted to share. I'm a big believer of Dave Ramsey. I read his books. I watch his, podcasts. Um, business mindset, everything that he has to offer, I think is really good. Some people get lost in the sauce of what he's talking about and, you know, that type of thing, right? But I think his percentages are perfect, and I don't think there's anything wrong with them. And I wanted to go through what my percentages currently look like, as well as what, you know, everything else is going on here. So, first of all, cost of living obviously is going up, and it's been getting worse over the years. In 1990 in Canada, the cost of living was minimum wage, and minimum wage was about $5. On this chart on the right, we're looking at this chart on the right. Cost of living was about minimum. Slowly over the years, the cost of living, in my opinion, because of greed and a bunch of other stuff that has happened over the last 30 years, has been getting away from minimum wage. If we were to look at, like, you can Google a productivity chart, usually minimum wage was, or like a wage is somehow correlated to the amount of production is used, right? If you build two houses, technically you should make twice the amount of money than building one house, right? But we've gotten so efficient with power tools, even robots and automated stuff are building houses, that productivity has gone up. Maybe you build four houses, but the wage is still the same as one house. It's kind of ridiculous, but it's slowly been going that way. And not that I blame robots or anything like that for that. I think it's greed in a sense of, I don't know, just throwing out an example. McDonald's doesn't want to pay an hourly wage for someone, then they build an ATM or a machine that's automated that they don't have to pay hourly, right? Sure, there's an hourly cost of power or whatever that looks like, but what I'm essentially saying is they've saved that, but like, because they saved it, the burgers and everything else McDonald's offers doesn't go down in price, right? They got shareholders. That's the problem with, public companies. They always got to pay their shareholders and their debts and all this other stuff. That it's always an incentive to do bad and make more money to provide for that, right? Rather than scaling the wages with, the production level, right? If you open one McDonald's or if you open 50 McDonald's, they don't the production that they can do versus how much income they make is not in a percentage correlated sense, if that makes sense. So what this shows, and this is off of Stats Canada on the right here. I took the minimum wage. This is just an average kind of across Canada. In some provinces it's lower, some provinces it's higher. So the blue line on the bottom is minimum wage. Minimum wage used to be a living wage. Obviously, it's very hard to live off minimum wage full time and have your own house or have your own whatever and keep in these percentages on the left, right? This is where if you're below this white line, you're going to be suffering in some sort of percentage. That's why I'm sharing these two kind of things beside each other. So blue line, minimum wage. I think every province is trying to get to $15 of minimum wage by 2024. Obviously, that is we'll quote, to help inflation. Really, it's just because they screwed it up. The government has screwed it up, right? And so this green line, this green line is 2 times minimum wage. This top green line is 3 times minimum wage. This range right here is about the average across Canada, is in between this range. So the low, the high on here of the average, right? So theoretically, if you're making between this is 2022, about $27 an hour, between 27 and 38 or something like that, I think it is. You're in the average. That's average wage, right? If you're below that, you're below the cost of living. You might get a 1-bedroom place. You might be able to save, especially if you cut your savings, your health, your utilities, your food budget. If you cut stuff in half, your housing can be more, right? But that's where it's these percentages get out of whack if you're below the white line. If you're above the white line, great. If you're not, it's hard. And this white line, it was announced, or it was calculated, I guess, that the living wage is about $30 an hour, full time. And if you are, say by yourself or single, if you're making less than $30 an hour, you're technically making below living wage. It's not like there's an imaginary poverty line that they take or they make. But like if you're making below, we'll quote it, we'll say that living wage should be minimum wage. If you're making below $30 an hour, is not a great time. And you look at this graph and you see the separation that happened between living wage and minimum wage, and now it's creeping up on the average person. And that's why you'll hear it, and it's probably, you've talked about it, people you've heard, oh, inflation, oh, can you imagine the price of groceries, oh, all this stuff. And that has to do with the real inflation. It's not the CPI number that you get every year over year, where it's compounding worse. That's a delayed inflation report. And I've said this a couple years ago when COVID kind of started, is the government has printed a ton more money that didn't exist 2 years, 3 years ago, and has doubled it. It's like I kind of gave the concept of money, I think, in a triangle type shape with Ruckers to show how, if there's more Ruckers tokens, that means they're worth less value, which means the prices, in quotes, go up for things, but really it's the same amount, right? It's like you have to remember that every 20 years, things are supposed to double every 20 years, right? The 5-cent candy should be a 10-cent candy if the quality was kept the same and the size was kept the same. It should be. That's just how inflation works. The idea of inflation is a great idea, doesn't work, right? If everybody, like if inflation came out of, like, let's say they printed 3% more Canadian dollars in Canada every year, that means everything should move up 3%. Well, wages don't because of greed. But like stuff like that, and people's their perception of money, it gets diluted in on this whole thing. I'm using lots of big words, I just realized right now. Anyway, let's get back to these graphs. If you're in between these two green lines, and they've said by 2024, $15 for minimum wage, that means $30 for the low of average, and that means $45 for the high average in 2024. $60 is considered a high wage. $60 if you do work in that full time, probably likely over 100K, depending on your compensation, all that other stuff, which is a decently high wage, right? There's obviously people that make more per hour, or people that don't even make hourly, but if you were to calculate an hourly rate, like there's business owners and stuff that don't have an hourly rate, right? It's based per job or whichever, which is great. But like this is just to give an idea, because most people are living off of either an hourly or salary, which is correlated to how many hours they work, which is like an hourly. But like just to give a graph, right? Just to show, I wanted to show why the cost of living has come up so many times. And here's the problem that we have to remember, is the trimming thing that I talked about in the previous video. If you cut, let's say, oh, everything went up 10%, well, I'll just cut my health budget, right? This currently is my current budget percentages. These are my percentages. I'm saving about 29% right now. I have some in recreation, personal insurance, health, transport, food, utilities, housing, miscellaneous flex. I have other category, which isn't part of this category, which is kids. I think kids are kind of in, he doesn't have kids in his thing, but I do. And then giving. And I know that, like, if I were to look at some of these, I'm like, oh, look, my housing is super small. That's great, right? I can save there while I can. And so I'm putting it into savings. Anything that's I'm not using, like, sure, I could upgrade my place, but like, if a recession, let's say, is happening, I am, happy and prepared, right? Like, some people are getting so pinched right now because their housing or their mortgage has doubled, and all of a sudden they're like, they were in this, but they have a ton of debt, and now it's 50%, like I said in the trimming video. It's like you just cut that in half. What is suffering? What's going to suffer here, right? So, what do you call that? I'm not going to edit this out because I think it's quite funny when I script my words. Ideally, you want to be at least getting the cost of living wage every year to maintain the same lifestyle, to maintain these same percentages, right? So it's like, how do you do that? Well, obviously, first thing is, if you work, go ask for a raise. Say, hey, cost of living has gone up, so you're technically paying me less, so I need, just match inflation. That's all you gotta do. Problem is, inflation is, let's say in theory, 100%, I don't know how many businesses are going to give you double the money for your current work. They should, but they don't, right? Or if you save them money, or all this other stuff, right? But this is where I wanted to show, the percentage-based budget tied with the cost of living. If you can stay or keep above the white line, if you just stayed the white line, your percentages would always be the same. These would never change. And you would continue to live the same lifestyle that you do today into the next few years, right? So, last thing I wanted to share in this video before it gets too long, paste this. This is the Canadian dollar. This is what I shared in the beginning of my collection of lessons. This is how much money there was in, I think it's in billions or millions and stuff in Canada. And then COVID happened, and look at how much money was printed. 5 times. If this was let's say this is a 1 and this is a 5, obviously. So this is 5 times the amount of money in 1 year was printed, and they're trying to get it back down right now, right? With the whole recession starting to happen and everything. You could see this coming, in my opinion. But this is why things are going up in price, because if this was the current cost of inflation, and if I were to, let's say, draw a line to continue this line in this path, we'll make it red so we can see it better. If this was the line that things generally increased, right? And then now it's like, if you were to attach that into here, right? Obviously nothing changed. It was a bit delayed in here, 2021. This is where we started seeing numbers of 5%, 6%, CPI and stuff. This is starting to angle because it needs to come up to here. You got to remember this. It's got to come up to here eventually. They're going to touch. Inflation is going to touch it, right? So then it's going to continue going up. This is over here, this white line going up. Eventually, let's say whenever this mellows out or whatever, eventually we'll get there. So I would expect, and I would hope, I don't know where this is going to go. I can't chart this, unfortunately. I would hope that this line would come down and match somewhere around that 2 times mark, in this zone. If I were to draw a zone, meaning everything just doubled in price. I would hope that the government can get that under control. I don't know if that's going to happen, but ideally that's what I hope, right? Cost of living will slow down. That would be great. And then our wages can continue back to where they should be. I don't know. It's just, I wanted to share that. Let's erase all this so I can get back to what we saw originally. It's just, you need to not trim things. That, if you're trimmed, I've trimmed all my subscriptions, all my expenses, everything that I could. There's nothing more to trim. I'm doing the best I can, right? And a lot of people are doing the best they can. And so there's nothing more to trim. It's just well, what category do I sacrifice because the government screwed stuff up? A lot of people, they don't save. A lot of people don't invest. My savings will automatically turn to investings once you get your emergency fund. I'm already started doing that type of thing. Some people have a category for debt, and it's just you need to get rid of the stuff. And then you need to run as slim as you can to get as far ahead of this as you can, because if you don't, it's going to catch up to you. And these percentages will get out of whack. The cost of living will surpass your job. Then it's what do you do? Do you work 2 jobs? Now you work 80 hours? Well, what kind of life is that? It's not great, And the worst thing is people that are close to retirement, and then inflation hits them. It's let's say somebody had $2 million in retirement, and then inflation goes up double. $2 million is now worth $1 million. So what did that do? Just reset you. How do you make another $1 million? It just reset you down. If you were supposed to retire in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, what does that push you out to now? 30 more years till you retire? We gotta figure this stuff out. So that's what I want to share in this video. Cost of living obviously going up, but you just need to see it and visualize it and be prepared as best as you can. Keep your percentages in these categories over here as my voice cracks, because that, in my opinion, gives you the best chance to be the most happy and successful in your life. So hope you're doing well. Thanks, and talk soon.